Welcome in to the Women's Basketball Now podcast here on the Hoop Central YouTube channel. This is Hamilton Hill joining you as always. Thank you for taking the time as well to join us also. A lot of exciting stuff to talk about here on this episode today. We're going to have a huge focus on the transfer portal. That's actually what this entire show is going to be about. Women's college basketball and the transfer portal. And we're going to have a focus on 5 teams in particular here today. Maryland, UConn, Oregon, Kentucky, and Oregon State. And all of those teams in very different situations when it comes to the transfer portal. A team like UConn, obviously they don't have many players transferring out. They're looking for more players to come in. Teams like Maryland, Oregon State, Kentucky, and Oregon all have a lot of players heading out. And on that same token, we're going to talk about roster breakdown and see how those players going out affect the projected rosters for those teams next season. So we're going to get things started by talking about Maryland, one of the premier teams in the country, a team that's also been known for going out in the NCAA tournament early and not living up to the lofty expectations that they have every single year. And maybe it's because of that, other things internally with this program, we see a lot of players transfer out. High-level recruits leave this program after a year or two. It's one of those things that it's just become a recurring problem for Maryland. And this season, this offseason, has been very rough for them. Angel Reese, arguably the best player in the transfer portal, 17.8 points, 10.6 rebounds, was the first player since 1975 to average a double-double for Maryland. And she is absolutely their biggest loss by far. And like I said, is probably the best player available in the transfer portal this offseason. Ashley Owusu, 14.3 points she averaged this past season. In 2021, she won the Shooting Guard of the Year award, the Drysdale Award. Those two, very significant losses for them. Again, Owusu, 14.3 points per game. Reese at almost 18 points per game, again, along with 10.6 rebounds. Mimi Collins in the post also transferring out. Tyza Kislova and Shanice Lewis also heading out as well. And again, that's 5 players for Maryland that are leaving. And that leaves Diamond Miller as the only player who started more than 10 games coming back for this Maryland team. So we talked about this on our Notre Dame podcast. They lose a lot of players due to the transfer portal. Same thing happening here with Maryland. This whole team is going to look so different next season. And it's not like they're doing a ton of lights-out recruiting right now. So these players heading out has a very big impact. Now, we've seen Maryland get transfers in. We've seen them have the ability to bring in players, even with the players that have headed out. So obviously, they're going to look to the portal to get players in. Yes, they've been hurt by the portal with players going out, but they can still build this roster back up and have a very good basketball team. But one thing that we've kind of learned to expect with Maryland over the years is not to put them in the Final Four in our preseason projections and put them in the top 5, because by the season's end, that's not what's going to be happening. That's really not going to be the reality. And again, tons of factors could lead to a player transferring from a school, but Maryland is one of those schools notorious for, like I said, going out in the tournament a little bit early and not living up to those expectations. And you've heard this from other transfers, and it's something that's kind of come up in the past, is that maybe the system there doesn't allow players to operate as freely as what's going on at other schools, and that's probably a big factor as well, because a couple of years ago when Shakira Austin left and Taylor Mikesell left to go to other schools, that's something that was brought up. You know, the system is not right for particular players, and it's not as free and open as it is at other programs. So that's really kind of the big thing with Maryland right now. I want to go over and talk about UConn next, and the situation with UConn right now is one player has transferred out, but really what we're going to talk about with them is players that they could be bringing in. And they have a lot of potential transfer targets, and still very early. Again, all of these players that are in the portal, really just in maybe their first week in the portal, first few days in the transfer portal, and they haven't had a whole lot of time to get schools on them yet. So it's just kind of potential targets, possible targets for the Huskies. The one Husky that's transferring out is sophomore post player P Piath Gabriel, and this is something that we kind of expected. This is something that I saw coming. And something that I kind of alluded to on the last UConn podcast was, if there was any player on this roster that was going to transfer this offseason, it would be Gabriel. She scored 54 points, grabbed 37 rebounds in 35 games over the 2020 and 2021 seasons for UConn, but just could not get out there on the floor consistently. And if a player is not getting out there and developing the way that they feel they need to, then they're going to transfer. You know, UConn has had such a loaded roster over the last couple of years, it's been hard for her to get out there. So she is moving on. Wish her the best. She's very talented, very physical on the inside. Sister of Wendy and Gabriel, former 5-star recruit who played at Kentucky years ago. Definitely a player that can add some instant impact to a potential program, whether that's a mid-major program, whether that be another high-major program. I expect her to go to a high-major school for sure and make some sort of impact. She is one of those players that, again, brings that size and brings that physicality to the table, and she'll be good somewhere else. But, again, it just wasn't at UConn, where she could show off everything that she could bring onto the basketball court. So that's the situation with UConn and players going out. We don't expect many other players to go out for the Huskies. Obviously, there's always that possibility. You never know what players are thinking, and you never know, what players are going to do. But Gabriel is the only one that I feel is really going to be transferring out this offseason. Everyone's been talking about Nika Meal and, Aubrey Griffin, Amari DeBerry. Those players are going to stick around, in my opinion, and be a part of this team next season because UConn's going to need them, especially if they strike out in the transfer portal. And now let's talk about some possible targets for UConn. There are a ton of players that they could add at a number of positions, and I think the top target on everyone's board right now is Angel Reese from Maryland. We just talked about her a minute ago. Jillian Hollingshead from Georgia is another name to watch. Princeton has lost Abby Myers, Ivy League leading scorer and the number one player easily on that Princeton team. Definitely someone to watch. She plays in the backcourt, and UConn obviously has a lot of players in the backcourt right now. Paige Bueckers, AZ Fudd. Obviously, you have Nika Meal still there, but Myers could bring some instant scoring if UConn decides to go that route. So definitely keep an eye on her. And then on the inside, you've got Rihanna Edwards leaving Kentucky and Taylor Jones leaving Oregon State. Jones is 6'4", coming off an injury, only played in 9 games for Oregon State this past season in what was a strugglesome season for the Beavers. Edwards had a really good season for Kentucky, averaged 16.8 points. Again, brings some physicality, brings some size, and that's something that UConn needs more of, more finesse on the interior. That's something as well that we talked about on the last podcast. They need more of that coming in. So Edwards and Jones, 2 post players to watch, and Ashley Owusu, one of the other transfers from Maryland, being followed on Instagram right now by Morgan Valley, assistant for UConn. It's going to be interesting, again, with all these guard transfers to see what UConn does, because there is a possibility that they could add maybe one more guard to go along with Bueckers, Fudd, Nika Meal. But, again, if that's going to happen, you're looking at Owusu, maybe Abby Myers. Morgan Jones, transfer from Florida State, is a name that's been mentioned as well. But it's going to be interesting. I think UConn's more in the business of trying to find a post player and trying to find some more interior finesse here in the transfer portal than going after guards. But, again, it's going to be interesting to see. Those are just some of the possible targets for the UConn Huskies. Angel Reese, Jillian Hollingshead, Abby Myers, Ashley Owusu, Taylor Jones, and Rihanna Edwards. And there's many more names that could be potential targets for UConn. And again, once we get further down the line here with these transfers, we're going to see confirmed interest from schools and players starting to visit and really ramp up that process. But it's still very, very early right now. So those are some possible targets for UConn. Going over to Oregon. Oregon is one of those teams as well, just like their Pac-12 rival Oregon State, who we're also going to talk about. Very rough offseason. Very similar situation to what's going on in Maryland right now. Oregon has the following players going out: Kylie Watson, Maddie Shure, Sydney Parrish, Shania Pinto, and Taylor Bigby. All of those players heading out. Now, you look at a lot of that 2020 class, that vaunted 2020 class for Oregon, almost every player is now gone. 3 of the 4 commits from that class are now transferring. Kylie Watson was ranked 17th in that class of 2020, Shure ranked 19th, and Parrish ranked number 8. So top 10 player there. She averaged 8.5 points this past season, Shure averaged 4.7, and Watson averaged 3.8. So Kylie and Maddie didn't have nearly as much impact as Sydney Parrish, who started pretty much every game for Oregon. But all of them heading out. Taylor Bigby, as a freshman, only played 9 games, didn't get a whole lot of playing time. And Pinto, who was a JUCO transfer, much of the same. Didn't get much action on the floor and just really couldn't get out there. And that's something that we just talked about with Gabriel from UConn. Same thing with some of the players there at Oregon. But they have a 2022 recruiting class coming in that is right up there, one of the best in the country for this upcoming season. And you have 5 stars Chance Gray, Grace Van Sluten, 4 stars at Jenna Esai and Kennedy Basham. Those players, those 4 players, that core there, going to help make up for the losses to the transfer portal. But this has kind of been a theme here with Kelly Graves' team. Players going out and trying to find new college homes, new destinations. So it's something that's kind of been coming up at Oregon the last few years. And it's a little bit concerning because you think of Oregon as one of the best programs in the country, especially the recruiting. They're right up there. They're one of the best recruiters in America. But just like Maryland, they can recruit, but can they keep those players for a long period of time? And it looks at this point like those two schools especially have not been able to do that consistently, especially since 2020 for the Oregon Ducks. Now going over to Oregon State, another school that's been hit hard by the transfer portal. Their top two post players, Kennedy Brown and Taylor Jones, are out. We mentioned Taylor Jones a little bit when we were talking about possible UConn targets. 9 games she played this season, again, only 9 due to injury. Kennedy Brown missed 2020 with an injury, had 7.9 points and 6.3 rebounds this past season, so did bounce back and kind of get back into form a little bit. Greta Kampstrader, who started 25 games, is also in the portal, as is Taya Corosdale, who averaged 7.3 points and 7.4 rebounds. So all of those players heading out. And again, a mass exodus, just like at Oregon and just like at Maryland. And other schools are going to look to take advantage of that. Kennedy Brown is an interesting name as well. I think she should be as much of a priority as Taylor Jones in this portal. Because, again, like Taylor Jones, Kennedy Brown brings size to the table and brings a ton of versatility. And that's something that Oregon State has really relied upon, is the post players providing and generating offense. And I think when you're talking about UConn, if they're looking for more post play, she could be another target along with Taylor Jones. But if you're looking for someone to bring the finesse, you're maybe looking at a Reese who can get the double-double. You're looking at an Edwards from Kentucky. But those two Oregon State post players are really good as well. So Oregon State, things kind of falling apart for them a little bit as well after a strugglesome season. Again, Oregon didn't quite live up to the expectations. Neither did Oregon State. So definitely going to be interesting to see how those two programs continue to bounce back and use their recruiting classes to make up for what they've lost. And just like at Oregon State is bringing in a really strong 2022 class as well. We have a video from back in January talking about the 2022 class for Oregon State, so you can go back and watch that and see some of the players that they're bringing in. And we've talked a little bit about Oregon as well. Mainly with Grace Van Sluten. We have a Women's Basketball Now episode about her up as well. So definitely, if you would like, go take a look at that as well. And we're going to wrap up with Kentucky. And we've already talked about Rihanna Edwards, who averaged 16.8 points. She's out. But also, you have Jasmine Massengill and Treasure Hunt, also in the portal. Massengill averaged 7 points this past season. It was 7.9 to be exact. And Treasure Hunt averaged 6.9 points on the year. So, yet again, another program really hit hard. Obviously, Ryan Howard going to the WNBA, and now you lose these three. It's going to be hard for this team especially to fill the gaps, because with Oregon and Oregon State, they have like 3, 4, 5 commits coming in to fill the gaps that the transfers are leaving. Kentucky doesn't really have that as much. They don't have that luxury that those Pac-12 schools do. And same situation kind of going on with Maryland right now. Because they're not bringing in a ton of recruits right now, it's going to be hard to make up for all of those losses. And just going back to Maryland for a minute, not only do they lose those 5 players that we just mentioned earlier, but also Katie Benson and Chloe Bibby. Those 2 players are off to the WNBA. So that's 7 players gone for Maryland. When you count Ryan Howard, 4 players for the Kentucky Wildcats, and Oregon and Oregon State, similar kind of situation. So it's going to be interesting to see how they fill the gaps as well. Over 1,000 players are now in the transfer portal in women's college basketball. And you just think about that number, and if you really track the sport and you follow it, it's not something that's surprising, because in the transfer portal era, we've seen so many players just day after day, right when the offseason starts. Like the second your season is over, you're looking into other options, and we see so many players take this route, and sometimes it benefits them, and sometimes maybe you look at a player, maybe they should stay at their school that they were at. It's interesting to see just how they go through the process, and how all of these players are going to move on and find their next school. But again, the situation with Maryland, Oregon, Oregon State, and Kentucky is players heading out. On the UConn front, as we mentioned, it's more about trying to find players to come in and fill maybe a roster spot or 2. And again, whether that be at wing or mainly on the inside, that's the main area of focus for UConn right now. Going to be interesting. Again, we threw out a lot of potential targets for them. And as we go down the line, we're going to have more players that are going to be in the conversation for all of these schools. Players going out, potential players coming in as well. So it's been really good here today to take a look at the transfer portal. And those are just some of the programs that are affected, and just some of the players that are in. Again, we mentioned over 1,000 players in this portal right now, and so many schools just trying to fill the roster spots and already trying to do more recruiting on top of getting involved with high school recruits. So definitely a busy time of year, and no off time. Even though the season just ended and March Madness just wrapped up, still tons going on in women's college basketball. This has been a presentation of Hoop Central on YouTube. We thank all of you guys, as usual, for taking the time to watch. We'll see you in the next podcast. This is Hamilton Neal leaving you for now, but I'll see you next time.